Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Stephen Salel, and for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I'm the Robert F. Lange Foundation Curator of Japanese Art. The exhibition Lyrically Rebellious, the Prints of Onchi Kōshirō, which opened here last August. It's been a wonderful experience. I hope you've had an opportunity to see the show, which is currently on view in galleries 12 and 13 in the second floor above the museum entrance. The exhibition surveys the development of Japanese printmaking and in particular, a movement, a modern movement that we refer to as creative prints, or sosaku hanga, as well as the role that one particular artist, Onchi Kōshirō, played in that chapter of Japanese art history. This show commemorates the 70th anniversary of the artist's death, and it's the first large-scale exhibition of Onchi's work in the United States. And the catalog for this exhibition is the first large-scale English publication about the artist. This project, both the exhibition itself and the catalog, would not have been possible without the financial support of a few organizations. First and foremost, the Robert F. Lange Foundation, and also the National Endowment for the Arts, the Halekulani, and JCB. Equally important were the contributions and assistance of three scholars, Kuwahara Noriko, Elias Martin, and Ajioka Chiaki. I'm delighted that all three of them have come to Honolulu and have joined us this afternoon to talk about this project. Let's see. Let me quickly figure out how this clicker works here. Let me give you a preview of our schedule today. I'll give a short PowerPoint presentation at this time and mention those aspects that each of our scholars wants to discuss during the group conversation. We'll then explore these subjects for about 40 minutes. For an additional 10 minutes, we will take questions from you all. And finally, we will move over to the gift shop, where our guests and I would be happy to sign copies of the catalog for you all. I hope that you will join us over there. This exhibition was a challenge to curate because the show's art historical context is a bit unusual. Here at Homa, we are used to seeing works of traditional ukiyo-e prints, such as landscapes by Hokusai and Hiroshige. Although Onchi was a descendant of that tradition, he distanced himself from it as much as possible, looking instead to his contemporaries in Europe, such as Edvard Munch and Wassily Kandinsky. In addition, Onchi's own work evolved in surprising ways. Whoops. Where am I? These are me and the scholars. Hold on a second while I orient myself with these slides here. His early work, influenced by his education at the Tokyo School of Fine Arts, which he entered around 1910, can be divided into typical genres of Western graphic art: portraiture, landscapes, still lives, and figure studies. This focus on Western genres reflect not only Onchi's training at the Tokyo School of Fine Art, but also the bias of the federal government's annual juried art exhibitions. The central image here, let's see if I can get this. Hold on, there we go. The central image here, Onchi's print Among the Rocks from 1929 was exhibited during those annual juried art exhibitions. For a long time, Japanese prints were excluded from those government-sponsored shows because woodblock prints were considered commercial art rather than fine art. But it was thanks to Onchi and his comrades at that time that woodblock prints were finally accepted into the show. In addition to these four classic genres of Western art, Onchi, following the example of several Western artists at the time, also explored a fifth genre, depictions of subjects invisible to the naked eye, such as music, poetry, and emotional states, and the concept of lyricism as it applies to these three topics. On the left, here is the first print from Onchi's lyric series, which he began in 1914. Let me introduce the aspect of Onchi that each of our guests and I want to focus on during the group discussion. Following the tenets of the creative print movement, Onchi produced most of his prints without assistance, and because he was more interested in communicating his ideas than creating technically perfect images, his prints have a very painterly feel to them. Elias will talk about this in greater depth during our group presentation. That painterliness is particularly noticeable in this portrait of the poet Hagiwara Sakutaro, which was later reprinted after his death by artisans who worked in a much more technically clean manner. Critics, though, have described such commercially oriented editions as lacking in the artist's spirit and therefore inferior. The abstract prints that Onchi produced after the Pacific War were far more innovative than his earlier work, but when you inspect them closely, again, you will notice a painterly, improvisational approach to his work. In our discussion, Chiaki will focus on the contrast between Onchi and another important member of the creative print movement, Munakata Shiko. Munakata's distinctive style enabled him to become the most recognizable of the Sosaku Hanga artists. One reason for Munakata's fame was his alliance with the Mingei arts and crafts movement led by Yanagi Soetsu. Munakata's gestural style and his embrace of Zen Buddhist philosophy, which was fashionable throughout the United States in the post-war period, further endeared him to the American public. The imagery in Munakata's prints mostly originated from Buddhist iconography, and this series of prints, entitled Two Bodhisattvas and 10 Great Disciples of Shakyamuni, is one of his most recognizable works. The images depict two bodhisattvas, Fugen and Monju, the attendants of the Amida Buddha, as well as 10 arhats, disciples of the Buddha who, although not yet enlightened like bodhisattvas, have devoted themselves to spiritual refinement. Here we find the antithesis to the sophisticated conceptual exploration of abstract imagery by Onchi. Munakata's work is figurative and more simply expressed. It's easy to understand why the public found his prints more accessible. His prolific output made his artwork more available as well. Just as Munakata Shiko seemed to be aligned with the aesthetic beliefs of the Mingei arts and crafts movement, I myself think it's important to recognize the influence of 19th century Romanticism, particularly Romantic poetry, upon the work of Onchi. Onchi produced his own books, and here is one, Insects, Fish, and Shellfish, which we have on display in the exhibition. Onchi not only illustrated the book, he also wrote the poetry, which, for the purpose of this exhibition, my colleagues and I have translated into English. What's noteworthy about these poems, What's noteworthy about these poems is that they have no connection to traditional Japanese haiku, waka, or tanka poems. Rather, they're based on the European notion of romantic or symbolist poetry. An early example of this combination of printmaking and poetry by Onchi is the magazine Tsukuhae, Reflections of the Moon, which he and his classmates Fujimori Shizuo and Tanaka Kyokichi produced between 1914 and 1915. On the left is a print by Onchi from the first issue, and on the right is the cover of the 6th issue. One literary precedent to Tsukuhae was the poetry magazine Myojo, or Bright Star, in which the very first Sosaka Hanga print, created by Yamamoto Kane, was published in 1904, a full decade earlier. On the right is Yamamoto's print, and on the left is the cover of that issue of Myojo. A more direct influence upon Tsukuhae was Shirakaba, or White Birch, another coterie magazine first published in 1910. In addition to creating this magazine, the publishers of Shirakaba organized several exhibitions of European modern art in Tokyo during the 1910s. These shows featured futurist, cubist, and expressionist prints, and they had a profound influence upon Onchi and other creative print artists. And it's important to note that both Myojo and Shirakaba were in turn inspired by late 19th century European publications that combined romantic poetry and woodblock prints, such as Pan, which was produced in Berlin. If we look at the creative prints movement in this way, the connection that Onchi has with his subjects becomes clearer. For example, Hagiwara Sakataro, the subject of Onchi's famous portrait, was a poet who worked in the Romantic and symbolist traditions. Here I offer a quote from the preface of Hagiwara's poem, Ice Island. And like Onchi's poetry, that of Hagiwara has little connection to traditional Japanese forms such as haiku, waka, or tanka. Instead, they have much more similarity to the romantic poetry of Charles Baudelaire or Edgar Allan Poe. Not surprisingly, even Onchi's portrait of Hagiwara conveys a mood similar to the famous photographs of these two Western authors. That connection to Romanticism is equally visible in Onchi's abstract works, which were strongly influenced by the European artists Wassily Kandinsky and Odilon Redon. As Noriko will mention during our discussion, Onchi and other Sosakuhanga artists benefited from the support of several American collectors. One of the first of these supporters was William Hartnett, who moved to Japan in 1947 and who worked in the U.S. Army Department of Education, organizing events that would enable members of the Allied Occupation Army a better appreciation of Japanese culture. One event that Hartnett organized was a concert by Suwa Nejiko, a Japanese musical prodigy who moved to Europe to train as a violinist and who eventually returned to Japan. This print by Onchi depicts that performance. The following year, Hartnett organized an exhibition of modern Japanese prints at the Mitsukoshi department store in Nihonbashi district of Tokyo. This was the first opportunity for many people, both American and Japanese, to see creative prints. The collector and researcher Oliver Statler soon thereafter followed Hartnett's example and began to collect creative prints. Many of those works eventually entered the repository of the Art Institute of Chicago, but Statler lived and taught in Honolulu for much of his later life, and as a result, he also gifted many works of his collection to Homa. Statler's greatest contribution to the creative print movement was his publication, Modern Japanese Prints, An Art Reborn, the first English text on Sosakuhanga. Statler didn't speak Japanese, so he researched his book with the assistance of his interpreter, Uchima Ansei, a Japanese-American born and raised in Los Angeles. As he worked with Statler and met various Sosakuhanga artists, Uchima eventually began to explore woodblock printmaking himself and became a significant member of the movement. By the way, I should mention that currently Dr. Kuwahara is working on an exhibition of Uchima Ansei's work in Japan that will open, I believe, in the next few months. So if you're interested in that subject, please, by all means, talk with her about it and keep your eyes open. The show will be traveling throughout Japan. Rounding out this trio of American collectors who assisted the creative print artists was the author James Michener, who amassed a collection of several thousand modern Japanese prints, which he donated to Homa. In addition, though, he also sought to educate the public about these artworks. Here's a photo of him giving a lecture about Sosakuhanga prints here in the basement lecture hall. He also published several texts on the field of Japanese prints, such as The Floating World, The Modern Japanese Print and Appreciation, which he published 8 years later, functioned as a sort of catalog for a print competition that Michener organized. So now that I have given you a little bit of background about the exhibition that's currently on display and the topics that my guests and I would like to talk about, let me introduce our guests. Noriko, would you be able to come up onto the stage, please? Kuwahara Noriko is an independent scholar based in Chiba, Japan. She received her MA in art history from Ochanomizu Women's University and her PhD in art history from the University of Tsukuba. She recently retired as a professor of Japanese art history from Seitoku University in Chiba. She has published extensively on Onchi Kōshirō and modern Japanese prints and received the Ringa Prize for her 2012 publication, A Study of Onchi Kōshirō, Modernity in Japanese Prints. Her publications include the essay, The Art of Saito Kiyoshi, Internationalism and Regionalism, which is included in the catalog Saito Kiyoshi Graphic Awakening, published by the Ringling Museum of Art, as well as post-war printmaking exchanges between Japan and the United States, 1945 to 1965, published by Serika Shobo. Please welcome Kuwahara Noriko. Chiaki. Ajioka Chiaki is an independent scholar and Japanese art consultant based in New South Wales, Australia. She received her MA in Fine Arts from the University of Melbourne and her PhD in art history from the Australian National University. She worked as a curator of Japanese art at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Sydney. She specializes in modern Japanese prints and crafts and has published several articles on those subjects. She curated Hanga, modern Japanese prints, at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in 2000, and she co-curated Japan in Sydney, Professor Sadler and Modernism 1920 through 1930s at the University of Sydney Art Gallery in 2011. She has collaborated with Professor Kuwahara on essays about modern Japanese prints since 2000. Please welcome Ajioka Chiaki. Last but not least, Elias. Elias Martin is the founder and owner of CollectingJapanesePrints.com and a member of the Ukiyo-e Dealers Association of Japan. With over 25 years of professional experience as a dealer, curator, and educator, he has built important private collections and placed works in notable public institutions. He is also a board member of the Japanese Art Society of America, JASA. He specializes in Japanese woodblock prints from the ukiyo-e, shin-hanga, and sosaku-hanga traditions, as well as Japanese post-war painting. And he is passionate about educating both clients and the public about these art forms. As a collector, he has amassed one of the most significant collections of sosaku-hanga, including the largest private collection of works by Onchi Kōshirō. Please welcome Elias Martin. So at this time, whoops. So can everybody hear me okay? Wonderful. So at this time, I'm going to dispense with these notes here, which I've been nervously clutching for the past 15 minutes or so, and see if we can have a bit of a group discussion here. We have a couple of questions that we've prepared, and in addition, whoops, I'm going the wrong way again. I'd like to basically go through this PowerPoint a second time so that each of our guests has an opportunity to talk about the works and the issues that they're interested in. Let's see. Before right now, we're stopping on the works that Elias is going to talk about. But before I hand the microphone over to Elias, I wanted to ask a general question to the three of you, which is, how did you become interested in this subject of Onchi Kōshirō and the creative prints movement? Maybe Noriko, if I could ask you to begin.
Yes, about 40 years ago, when I was a university student, my French language school teacher taught me about Onchi. Coincidentally, he himself was a printmaker as well as a language teacher and had met Onchi when he was young. And at that time, I wanted to study Western art, but he said that there hadn't been a lot of research done on modern Japanese prints, so he wanted me to study Japanese prints. And soon after that, I visited the museum library and looked at the book of Onchi's art. Before then, I knew nothing about Onchi or his art. I had never even heard his name. That encounter with his work was the start of my studies. It's okay?
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Chiaki, how about yourself?
Well, good question. I did my master's research at University of Melbourne, and my supervisor told me that I should write about or research about Munakata Shiko, because she liked the artist. And so when I was studying Munakata's background as a creative print movement, I learned that Onchi was a main figure leader and a very important artist. Before then, I only knew Onchi from like bookshop design. If you go to, perhaps you know that if you go to a bookshop in Japan and you buy a book, they give you the cover. They put the cover on your purchase. And I noticed word like Onchi, and that was all I knew about him. And when I, so in my also, in what was the PhD research, and I was researching on Mingei movement, and also my supervisor told me that I should actually study history of creative print movement. So I did. And when I became a curator at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, I organized this exhibition, year 2000, the actual year of the Sydney Olympics, would you believe? It's a long time ago. And I had been introduced to Kuwahara-san the year earlier, and I knew that she was doing a PhD research on Onchi, so I asked her to write an essay on Onchi. And after that, we somehow got along, and so I decided to help her research and learn also myself. So together we made, I don't know how many times, a visit to United States, visiting art galleries, libraries and archives. So we are having a lot of fun, and most of my knowledge is basically coming from Kuwahara-san.
As with the rest of us. Elias, how about yourself? How did you get interested in Onchi and the creative prints movement?
Well, that's simple. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to be among all of you. Onchi never traveled to the West. And funny enough, I met him in Chicago. And the city of Chicago is blessed to have a collection of Onchi's work from the Oliver Statler collection. And Oliver Statler, as Stephen, you referenced him, he's a contemporary of Michener, and they knew each other. In fact, Oliver Statler and Michener acquired quite a large collection of Onchis, as you've seen in the gallery upstairs. And so I traveled to the Art Institute one day, and there were Onchi prints on display, and my life changed. Something happened that day. I was able to experience something, the way I think of it is that I really got a really strong communication that Onchi was trying to express in his artwork. And so, I just wanted to learn more and more about him, and I was lucky enough to be able to find the prints that I have. So,
thank you. I suppose I should say a little bit about how I became interested in Onchi myself. I started working here in January of 2012 as a research assistant of Japanese art. And at that time, my boss, Sean Eichmann, who I'm happy has joined us this afternoon, he basically trained me and taught me most everything that I know about Japanese prints. As you're aware, much of our museum's collection of Japanese prints focuses on the ukiyo-e prints from the Edo period, works like Hokusai and Hiroshige. And these were artists who I had been aware of since I studied art in college. But we also have this large collection of modern Japanese prints, which I was oblivious to. And I remember as I started to learn about these prints, Sean often said to me, now these are works by Onchi Kōshirō. These are extremely important works in our collection, sort of like the king of modern Japanese prints. And so I very reverently included them in occasional print rotations. And it's just wonderful that 14 years later, here we are doing an exhibition on his work. I'd like to sort of shift gears and talk about some of the topics that each of you selected to discuss for this roundtable. And Elias, for your subject, you wanted to discuss some of the connoisseurship of Onchi's work and some of the stylistic aspects of his prints. I have here, please go ahead, tell us what you'd like to say.
Sure. I made my job today quite easy. I picked out some wonderful pieces to discuss. And they're also some of the most famous pieces in the collection put together by Michener. The portrait that we're looking at right now, as Stephen introduced earlier, is portrait of the poet's Hagiwara. And portraits are not new in Japanese prints. And the way that the portrait is featured in this design is actually kind of traditional. It's a 3/4 length portrait. And this particular portrait was done after the death of this poet, who Onchi had a personal friendship with. And his poetry was surrealist and deeply emotional, and it affected Onchi quite a bit, that influenced his own artwork. And this print was done in 1943. And so we're discussing modernism, and this particular print is interesting because it's a memorial print. It's posthumous. And there are other woodblock prints that were done as memorial portraits of famous people. You might be familiar with the memorial portrait of Hiroshige or Yoshitoshi. And this print is very different from those. In some ways, it's kind of controversial because a memorial portrait should have maybe some solemn, it should be solemn, but also paying sort of homage to an idea, maybe even an ideal. And this particular portrait is highly individualistic. We're looking at an individual. We're looking at a portrait of a lost loved one. And Onchi, in fact, made himself quite vulnerable, showing such a design with such emotionally charged imagery. And so also to look at the word modernist or modernism, Onchi used materials as his collaborators, and being an artist that carved the blocks and printed his own prints, he used every aspect of the woodblock printmaking process as an opportunity to express himself emotionally and to imbue the image with something unique and something beyond what was seen in ukiyo-e. Not to say those images weren't beautiful, but there were restraint. Restraint was really the term when we look at memorial portraits. And he breathed new life to portraiture, really. And so I'm going to zoom in on aspects of this design so we can have a look. I'm going to let that play. Stephen did a great job at sort of taping a close-up of the printing. And so in this case, since Onchi was actually printing these prints himself, he developed a very spontaneous wet printing technique. And I should also say that woodblock prints are meant to be seen in a very intimate setting. Although they're up in the gallery behind glass, you can notice these things. Imagine yourself, though, as you're looking at these prints, holding them in your hand, being able to see the texture that this type of printing was able to achieve. It's not just a printing to give a sense of, there's his eye, there's his nose, and that's hair. No. Every aspect of the composition is an opportunity to express yourself. And Onchi certainly did do that. This was his friend that passed away. And these are the sort of the dark years leading up to the war, when artists and poets were censored. And the Hagiwara certainly was one of those tragic poets and artists that lost his life to this dark time. And so Onchi really wanted to commemorate his friend with a fitting tribute. And I think he did that quite well. Now, this design was received so well that Onchi, after the war, met many Western occupying forces, and they all sort of asked him for an impression. He did 2 copies before the war. They looked quite different. And then after the war, when he received commissions, basically, they were saying, please print me another one, he made maybe about 10 or so. I can't imagine him making more than 15. And so I would say about 10, and they sold quickly, and people kept asking him for more and more. And so he passed on the next edition to his assistant, his top student, Sekino. And there's a portrait by Sekino of Onchi in the gallery. And so he printed the second edition. And then Hirai, after Onchi's death in 1955, printed in memorial edition, a third version. And so what we're looking at here is the printing of the third version by Hirai. And what we could see here is Hirai did a good job of replicating the image, but what we're missing here is the emotion. This is more analogous to the portraits done in the Edo period, like, as I mentioned, Yoshitoshi, his memorial portrait, or the memorial portrait Hiroshige. You're capturing the person, you're capturing the image adequately. He stayed within the lines, he did his job. But Onchi's printing is wet, spontaneous, messy, charged with emotion, and you could see how different these two impressions are. And we're fortunate because we have both prints in the gallery where you can compare them side by side. Yeah. The background, even the background, it's very, it's done quite carefully, where Onchi's is really spontaneous. You can almost see light emanating from everywhere. And here, it's quite, regular. You can see the printing is, he did a great job at printing it, but again, we're looking at it, it's almost like a facsimile, really. And I should say, although we don't have the three impressions here, Helen Merritt, who wrote one of the more important books on modern 20th century Japanese prints, indicated that Onchi's impression was sheer poetry, Sakino's was prose, and Hirai's, which we just looked at, was a scholarly footnote. I could see that, absolutely. And so, should I go to the next print? Okay. Okay, I'll be very, very quick. On this one, getting back to modernism, Onchi was very aware of his materials and wanted to imbue his prints with a he wanted to give them the character of what he was using to print. And so in this design, it's featured with a couple of elements. The background were blocks of wood that were repatriated, or not, well, I should say, they were repurposed from his daughter's home renovation. So he took them and he's like, oh, I can use these as printing blocks. And he doesn't hide the fact that there were blocks. They're blocks. And he prints them. And then the red is it's Japanese charcoal that's been cut in half and stamped. And so all of these materials reflect Onchi's interest in experimentation, but they're also very Japanese in the sense that it's Japanese charcoal that is very connected to the culture, and his reverence for these materials is quite Japanese. And one last thing quickly, you might wonder in abstraction, you could say, well, why didn't he just start painting? Why wood block prints? And prints for Onchi were inherently Japanese. And you could also not, well, in painting, you could not achieve some of the effects you can through printing in woodblock prints, particularly with found objects. And in this case, in this print, the texture is fantastic on this design. And that's not something you could really achieve with oil painting. And so reflecting on these two pieces, they're certainly new, fresh, and they look as fresh as the day they were done. They look very relevant and again, revolutionary. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias. Moving on, may I? Thank you. Moving on to the subject of Munakata Shiko, I believe that Chiaki, you wanted to talk a little bit about the connection between Munakata and Onchi?
Yep. Yes. Okay, well, I thought I could talk about a little about Munakata, not to focus on Munakata and to keep your attention, get your attention away from Onchi, but to give a sort of different perspective of Onchi in the Japanese art world. Living in Australia, I often noticed that the people talk about Onchi and Munakata at the same level. And it's only 2 days ago that Iijima-san was telling us that, Onchi and Munakata are my heroes. And I heard exactly the same comment from Sydney printmaker when I was planning my creative print exhibition. She said, Onchi and Munakata are my heroes. Can I do something to help you? I'll do demonstration. And it was really interesting because in Japan, they are not talked together in that way at all. They're very different. And I tell you why. And perhaps that might give sort of a different perspective, say, Onchi. To start with, there are 2 woodblock print artists, and they're totally different types, as Stephen explained. Onchi was famous for this originality and very refined techniques, creative, while Munakata was Munakata's works are very bold, dynamic, and seeming free and sort of more intuitive. And each of them really fully explored the unique characteristics of the print media, of the plate, and was equally passionate about promoting print as important as painting, because in Japan, the prints were always considered inferior art compared to oil paintings, sculpture. Well, from I suppose partly the Western influence, and their activities, creative activities, also overlapped to a certain extent. Munakata was about 12 years younger than Onchi, but so he didn't actually start showing until about 1927. But they were showing they're both members of Japan Print Association, and also they did the government exhibition that Stephen mentioned, and also Kokugakai, that's another national sort of exhibition society. And their works are both selected to be shown at international exhibitions. But their positions in the Japanese art are very different. To start with, the family and the educational background is almost opposite. Onchi's family was very prestigious. The father was very connected to the family, and at one stage, one of the imperial prince was actually brought to Onchi's family home to spend some time. I don't know exactly how long. And also, Onchi studied European languages, so he could read. There weren't many translations, but a lot of intellectuals at that time in Japan studied European languages. So he was very proficient in like the German, French, and the English. So he had access to Western arts and music. On the other hand, Munakata was born in a very poor family. His father was a blacksmith in Aomori, at the northern tip of Honshu Island, and he only finished elementary school. But he was very hungry for knowledge, and he absorbed lot of knowledge from his friends, most of whom were literary people, writers. And also he was very sensitive to Japan's past, like mythological stories, legends, nature, and also Buddhist themes, and which Stephen also mentioned. Now, in many countries too, but in Japan, to the art world was it's very social hierarchy. It's very important. And so merit alone actually doesn't get you too far unless you're exceptional, like Munakata. And so there are also a lot of, like, of course, unspoken code of behavior, and your position expected to behave in a position in society. But Munakata was very confident of his own abilities, and often he pushed boundaries, and that caused frictions. Now, Stephen just mentioned his association with the Mingei, or folk craft movement, which was coming out at that time. The Mingei group discovered Munakata, and that was in 1936. And so Mingei group was claiming that the ordinary objects, everyday objects, were often have this egoless or unintended beauty, which was spiritual, and therefore it was more superior to intentionally created art. So they were also pushing this, their claims, and often clashed with mainstream art world. And they were often considered as a sort of a self-righteous group. Now they were promoting Munakata, and the leader Yanagi often said Munakata was the only printmaker who was doing the right job. So that didn't go down well with other makers, of course. So that was a part of the reason that they in Japan, so they are not the people who talk about Onchi didn't talk about Munakata very much. And but outside Japan, these sort of nitty-gritties of whatever was going on, you actually don't have sort of access. So people like Americans, Europeans, they just looked at their work and they responded. So while in Japan, the Munakata's works very often, some sort of folk art went wrong, or radical, wild type of folk art, the people outside Japan saw Munakata's like modernity and interesting, not so much interesting, rightly, that Onchi, from the very start of Munakata's career, Onchi saw exactly what Munakata was doing, and he was saying that Munakata's works were not sort of folk art, were far from that. And what was the word I was looking for was he initially Onchi described Munakata as like the shining existence of the print, the Japanese print world, and also he was pursuing the work, the printed image, or the effect of the print image that cannot be expressed in painting. And so they were on the very, like the similar ground in different ways. They're both very vocal about raising the position of print in Japanese art world. And many says like Munakata's technique is unsophisticated or kind of like a primitivism, yeah, but Onchi observed that artistic opulence. So that's the word that Onchi used to describe Munakata's work. So Munakata promoted prints wherever he could. And eventually, of course, some people might know that in the 1950s, after the war, Americans are also very keen to collect the Munakata. And his works started winning international exhibitions. Starting with Lugano print exhibition in 1952, and then São Paulo Biennale, he won the big prize in 1955. In 1956, he actually had a grand prize at Venice Biennale. So Munakata promoted prints wherever he could, and for him, when he won prizes, he interpreted as a recognition of prints, not that like as of him as an artist. So that way, so he had always had a very deep respect for Onchi and his work, particularly as a leader of creative print movement. So that's where to me, they really closely connected.
Thank you, Chiaki. Let me move on here. There were some comments that I made myself about Onchi's connection to the international movement of Romanticism, including his interest in combining woodblock prints with poetry, and the way that he was following in the footsteps of not only earlier Japanese artists, but also European artists. But I took quite a bit of time during my slideshow in talking about that. And so for the sake of time now, I'd like to sort of skip over this and get to the subject of American collectors of creative prints. And I believe that, Noriko, you wanted to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. I'll be focusing on Onchi and American collectors in the post-war era. Two major changes appeared in Onchi's post-war creative work. Firstly, while pre-war, Onchi produced both figurative prints and also abstract prints, he focused almost exclusively on abstract prints after the war. The second change was that while pre-war works were woodblock prints, post-war works used not only woodblocks, but also various materials such as paper plates, string, wire mesh, and leaves as printing plates. So why did such changes occur in his creative activities? The most crucial factor for Onchi was his encounters and interaction with Americans who stayed in Japan during the post-war occupation period. Among them, three individuals were particularly significant. As Stephen introduced earlier, they are Hartnett, Statler, and Michener. The emergence of American collectors and researchers who highly valued and purchased Onchi's prints enabled him to freely create the works he chose to. Thus, Onchi was able to create experimental prints. However, because he wanted to continuously produce new prints work, the number of editions of each was extremely limited. And since many of them ended up in the hands of American collectors, the majority of Onchi's post-war prints are now held in American museum collections. Many of the works currently on display at this gallery were formerly part of the collection of Statler and Michener. Onchi himself reportedly said that he wasn't concerned about his prints going to America. This was because printmaking was not recognized as having value in Japan at the time, and his works were not highly regarded either. And now, a retrospective marking the 70th anniversary of his death is being held here at the Honolulu Museum of Art. Onchi would surely be delighted with this outcome. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yes,
certainly.
one point about Munakata and Onchi.
Yes.
Yes.
I actually, this is a perfect I was about to say the same thing. We should talk a little bit about
Yes.
one another's ideas here.
Yes, this is a story. In 1955, Munakata and Onchi both exhibited prints at the Sao Paulo Biennale. And at that time, only Munakata won the grand prize. Onchi passed away without knowing this. And the following year, Munakata won the grand prize at the Venice Biennale. He said Japanese printmakers gained international recognition thanks to Onchi's passion for the print movement. And the work Onchi exhibited at the Sao Paulo Biennale was at the gallery, the last one, lyric number 32.
Yes.
Yes, it was exhibited at the last exhibition.
I see.
Yes, because it is very important work.
Elias, you had mentioned something about the relationship between Onchi and Munakata yourself. Did you want to comment?
Sure, and I'll be brief. Well, coming from a collector or even a dealer's perspective, those are two giant names. And I understand in Japan, they're not put together, but as a collector, you always mentioned Munakata and Onchi together. And because they approach things very differently. Munakata was much more public, much more or he was on TV, and he was also a character. You know, we could talk about that. I won't, but he was a character, and he was almost, you know, when I think about an artist, you know, almost like a character of an artist. What should an artist look like? What should they do? And Munakata was a really character, and so he was charming, and certainly that helped bring attention to him. Onchi was much more reserved, and he let his artwork speak for him. The emotion was there, but it was in the prints themselves. And so Onchi's work went out into the world and created converts that way, where Munakata, certainly his artwork was powerful, but it's also very closely associated with the person of Munakata.
He reminds me to some extent of Salvador Dali, or the other Japanese artist popular around the same time, Okamoto Taro.
Yes.
I believe that I heard a story about how Munakata was really interested in the painter Van Gogh, and Munakata, coming from the rural prefecture of Aomori, at one point in his career said, "I am the Van Gogh of Aomori."
He said, "I will become Van Gogh."
So it's exactly like what you said, Elias. There's a sort of persona that he seemed to adopt consciously or otherwise. We're running a little bit low on time before we begin the Q&A with our audience. So I was wondering maybe if anybody has any pressing comments, concluding comments that they wanted to make before that. If not, then maybe thank you all for your patience here. If there is any question that you have for our guests here, or any comments about either the exhibition or this, please let us know. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to quickly mention that the prints of Munakata will be on display in our Lange Gallery for Japanese prints beginning in early December and running until the end of the Onchi Kōshirō exhibition. So you are in for a big treat.
Oh, that's lovely. We have a chance to to compare them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, Miss.
First of all, thank you for this wonderful exhibition and the opportunity to speak with the experts. I've now seen the exhibition 3 times because I was just like so taken by it. The first, I have 2 questions. I think Elias, you said that Onchi never traveled to the West. Is that right?
Right.
Now that seems quite striking to me, given his family background and his inspiration influence he got from Western art and also his connection with American collectors. So was his not traveling to the West a deliberate decision, and what was the reason behind it? So that's one question. And then the second question, which I've been dying to ask, is each time I've seen the exhibit, I was taken not only by Onchi's artwork, but by the music that's playing there, which I think must have been very carefully, deliberately curated by some, I don't know if it's you, Stephen, or so, and I looked everywhere for what the pieces were, but there was no information provided. I only recognized the Ravel and the Prokofiev. I want to please share your thoughts behind the curation.
Let me because it's difficult for some people to hear the questions from the audience. If I may repeat the questions, the first question was, I believe, what was did Onchi travel outside of Japan? Did he travel?
Why?
And if not, why did he not do that? And the second question was about the music in the gallery. What music is played and why were those works selected? Elias, did you want to address the first question?
Very quickly, and I think I'm sure someone, Noriko might want to add to this, but I don't know why he didn't, but what I could say is that he was well versed in Western culture and art, music. He learned German in preparation to go into medical school, though he didn't. He was not admitted into the school to do that. Because he knew and read German, he was able to digest, a lot of the art publications coming into Japan that were in German. German expressionist works were known to him. So he was very cosmopolitan in that sense. But I don't know why he didn't travel to the West.
Noriko?
It's a very difficult question, but I think that he could learn a lot from European books. And also, he didn't like traveling. He was not active. I read all of his diaries. He didn't go trip even in Japan. 近づけた方がいい。And also, this is very confidential. This is, I think, this is my opinion. Perhaps Onchi's, it is difficult. Onchi's wife was a very strong person, and he got money from his wife's family.
Oh.
Yes, his wife was a very rich person, and but Onchi didn't get money by producing prints. So I think that the wife's family supported his activities. So and Onchi couldn't tell her he would like to go abroad. I think.
Perhaps can I just add to Elias something that, of course, Onchi could read a lot of information, but also he had a lot of friends who had spent years overseas, studied in Europe. And so in terms of information, he was very able to have quite a lot in the sort of what you call the simultaneously. For example, Yamada Kosaku, the first composer, modern composer of Western music in Japan. And he was the one who brought the exhibition of German expressionists from the Sturm Gallery to Japan, which he was very, Onchi was very inspired by. So, and they are also working together. So perhaps it's my feeling that Onchi didn't particularly miss too much because he didn't travel in terms of what he needed to know.
Regarding your second question about the music, we decided to put together a playlist of modern compositions, many European composers, well known, as you said, Ravel, Stravinsky, Debussy, as well as a couple of Japanese composers working in a European style. Unfortunately, the music available to us was a bit limited, and so I believe I included the works of some Japanese composers who were actually active after Onchi passed away, and who Onchi was probably unaware of. But I tried with that playlist to offer a kind of sense of the music that he listened to in his studio while he was making prints. We know from Noriko's research that he was so inspired by this style of music. And in January, if all goes well, we will have a public concert in the gallery where we invite some local musicians, maybe a trio of performers to play some of that music instead of using the ghetto blaster. Thank you. How are we doing on time? Okay. Another question. Yes, Rudy.
First, I want to say how beautiful this exhibition is, but I have a particular question that is, I've made prints myself. I'm totally fascinated by the painterly quality of all these prints. And can you comment how we achieved this? Because I find many people who don't understand how we could do this, and it's so exceptional.
Thank you. The question was, Rudy, having made prints himself, was struck by how painterly the works in the exhibition appear, and could we comment a little bit about that aspect of Onchi's work? Any takers?
I tried replicating that just to see how you could do it. Onchi did not use a kento or registration most of the time, and he moved the paper off the block in a certain way. So there's movement, and you'll see the wetness of it, but it's also kind of fuzzy, and that's caused by the movement. And also the paper that he used wasn't that absorbent, and the pigments rest right on the surface. They don't really saturate into the paper. That's also because he printed very quickly. So you can just imagine him doing this very quickly and in a very experimental sort of way.
Noriko or Chiaki, would you have anything to say about the painterly quality of Onchi's work?
At this exhibition, there was no Onchi's oil paintings. No.
There was not. That's
Yes,
correct.
but before producing a very realistic and prints like oil paintings, Onchi produced a lot of oil paintings, such as a portrait or mother and baby and his families. So I think that I compare the oil paintings and the prints. They are very similar. So Onchi tried to make prints like an oil painting at first. I think so. And
also, another motivation was that the prints were not accepted by the government run national exhibition, which was very powerful and prestigious, not until 1927. And so when prints were finally accepted, it was hung with oil painting section. So Onchi, to promote prints, Onchi was very aware that he needed to create something as strong and something that does not really look weak compared to oil painting around it. So that's another reason that he wanted to make very textured, sort of thick work.
Chiaki, you bring up a really interesting point there, dovetailing with that comment about the painterliness of Onchi's prints, which, Rudy, I hope answers your question. It also touches on a really interesting aspect of Onchi's work that, which is that he was trying to promote Japanese prints, in addition to being the leader of the creative print movement and one of the first abstract artists in Japan. He was trying to popularize Japanese prints, both to the government that was leading these national exhibitions and to the general public. If you have an opportunity to look at the catalog that we published for this show, Noriko wrote a wonderful essay that covers this and other aspects of Onchi's career. And actually, I think at this time, we're going to bring this roundtable discussion to a conclusion so that we can move down to the museum gift shop, where Noriko, Chiaki, Elias, and I are going to do a book signing. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming this evening, but also please, if you have some time, please come with us just around the corner to the gift shop, where we will be seated and we'll have a chance to chat with you. And it's a great opportunity for you to help support the exhibition and the museum through your patronage. We would greatly appreciate it. But for now, if I may ask you to join me in thanking the scholars for coming this afternoon.